Welcome to the last episode of this season of Speak Greasy, where we've been focusing on some of the pioneering women in the F&B community in India. My guest today has helmed some of the coolest spaces in Bangalore in the F&B scene with the Conservatory, the Courtyard, and Wine in Progress. Welcome to the show, Akhila. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Magazine Street Kitchen. I want to go back to the beginning, okay? I think you, like me, have had a very different journey and not the conventional sort of entry into F&B. So tell us a little bit about, your background, how it all started and how you ended up with the Courtyard.
Yeah, I still kind of find it a little odd when, I see myself as an F&B industry person now because it still, doesn't hit sometimes. But yeah, I mean, the journey has been very Bangalore-based. Grew up there, schooling, college, all of that, and then bachelor degree. And then I was in the US for a bit where I did an urban design program in architecture. So a lot of my ideas about design, urban design, what cities should be, what experiences should be, what lives we need to be living, in a city has come from that really. And with all of that learning, really, when I came back, I was angst-ridden about why Bangalore, we didn't have enough public spaces where you had good culture spaces as well that were, integrated into that.
And this was when, like roughly when?
2011. And that was a starting point really to think about what, really what I wanted to do. And I realized that I wasn't really a good architect. That was also a big moment. It was good that it came that early. Urban spaces and what they can do for people was really where my, heart was. And when I came back, I wanted to try and see what could be done in the public spaces of, Bangalore, because we have such nice public spaces, but it's very hard to get through to program them and, do something for the city there. That's when we had this space in Shantinagar, and, it's not one of the most exciting spaces for F&B because it's not really on the radar for going out, or for entertainment as such. Just like your space was, I guess, because I'm sure...
Still is.
Yeah. I mean, those are the kind of just constraints that one had to sort of look at, which you have as well. Like the first things we heard was, why there? There's nothing there. Nobody goes there. What's wrong?
I feel like we're going to be a bit of an echo chamber here today.
I know, right? Yeah. So it was that, but it was the only, space we had. So we're like, why not? And that's when the whole journey started to imagine what could we do with a space that can work as a public space for easy culture. The F&B came a little later, actually. The real goal of the space was, could we create a quasi-public space that becomes the first access point for easy culture?
So I want to pause you there because, I've read and heard you talk about this concept of easy culture. Talk a little bit more about what you mean by that.
I've coined this term. I hope it's not...
You have.
fake.
And it's something that it stuck out to me. I was like, no, this is not just about creating, a cultural space. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that kind of is associated with a lot more traditional sort of culture, right? And the traditional arts. And you had something a little more sort of contemporary in mind and maybe catering to a younger audience. Is that fair to say?
That, and also from a little bit of a personal experience of being like a jack of all, sort of not myself, I was interested in a lot of the arts, growing up, but I never really dedicated myself to anything. I was less lazy, I don't know, something, right? But I just wanted to do everything, but do it on the surface
casually,
and have fun with it,
yeah.
And not really, I don't think I had the rigor to sort of go into any of it, but just have fun with everything. And I kind of realized that maybe 95% of the population is like that. Why aren't there spaces for lazy people like us to just kind of, come and dabble a little, and just enjoy yourself and have a good evening that can feel a bit cultural, but not too heavy, The thing is that we have some nice cultural space in Bangalore, which is for theatre, for dance, for music and all of that. But the threshold is still there to kind of go into those spaces because you feel that you don't belong, or you feel that you won't understand, or you feel that you're not part of that world. So there is a barrier. And ideally, those barriers should not exist because these kind of arts need to be in larger, public spaces that you can just sort of just absorb without having to, commit a lot to, which happens usually in places like a park or,
Right.
you know,
And especially if you spent time in New York. I mean, that's kind of, really mastered that with things they do in the park, free events and
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Free events, public squares, public corners, parks, these are places where you kind of first get exposed to these kind of things that we don't have naturally. So that's really where it came from, that why, like, not everything needs to be, serious culture, and it need not equate serious art. It can just be a enriching experience that, you may come for a Baithak, which we do every month. And if you're interested, then you can go seek out something more serious. But a Baithak in Bangalore, otherwise, like, people don't have access to, because they don't even know where it's happening if you're not part of that group. That's something that used to bother me a lot, because I was never a serious, student of music or dance or theater. I just would do here and there. But if I really wanted to get to know where those shows were happening or what was happening, it was an effort. So that was really, I think, where the idea started from, that it just needs to be a public space where access to these kinds of things needs to be a lot more democratized in a way.
Just accessible, basically.
Just accessible. Yeah. And that makes cities a lot more livable. Like, one of the things we learned always was, when you design for cities, you kind of let people not just exist in this very harsh environment where you're just working all the time, but you need to move from that survival mode to a thriving mode, and you need spaces that allow you to do that, right? That's where your parks come in, your museums come in, and all of this. It kind of lifts you above the everyday
outlets,
life.
Right? They're outlets.
They're outlets. They're
needs. Yeah.
It sparks things in you. Those kind of spaces I felt were much needed. Bangalore, I felt, had an audience for it. It's a very engaging, explorative, curious audience, but with no, outlets as such. So that's where the idea came from.
So this was, like you said, back in 2011, 12. And so then, how did you actually go about creating the courtyard? You had this ancestral property.
Yeah.
In a place called Lal Bagh.
Yeah. And
which is actually, we're not far from the Lal Bagh of Bombay, but very different, I think, from your
Lal Bagh.
Lal
Bagh. Bagh here?
I mean, it's the Lal
What's
Bagh.
It called?
Lal
It's called Lal Bagh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the biggest Ganpati of, during
the
Ganesha.
Lal,
Lal Bagh.
Okay. Yeah. Now it
happens right here.
Right. So we are very close to the horticulture park, which is called Lal Bagh, and the area is called Shantinagar. And so we had the property there. And actually, it's a very funny story, because there was an art tech community space that had, we had given the space to a few years ago, in 2011, I think. And it was a very hippie sort of a tech joint that had kind of come about in our space, where there were these two people who had built 3 stories on, like, just pallet and racks. Okay, pallet and rack is like a temporary construction thing. And they had built like an art tech community space. It worked like a co-working space, but with a lot of artists and a lot of, like, just tech guys, coming and jamming. I mean, it's very Bangalore.
Very Bangalore, yeah.
Very Bangalore. Okay, this will not happen anywhere else. It will happen in San Francisco and Bangalore.
How many startups erupted from there?
I know, I'm sure there are many, actually. But so that was started by these 2 people we knew, and they did a great job, and they had to wrap up after a few years. But I could see the scenes, coming from there, and also with my, experience of, like, education and travel and all of that. And then seeing this happen as well, to see that there was a need for that kind of a space. And what actually happened was that they had built this space on, like, part of the property, and then there was the old house. And there were a couple of friends of mine and my husband who was like, oh, we want to start a cafe, because everybody in the damn world wants to start a cafe, because they think it's so glamorous and fun to do, right? And I was just this idiot who was just newly married. So I said, oh, yeah, of course, I'll help you.
That's one difference. I was like, you're crazy. I'm not coming anywhere near this. When Jay sprung the idea.
You were much smarter than me. Yeah. So, and I was just meant to help with, designing the space and nothing more. And I helped them design the space, and we were just kind of doing it up and whatever, just these 4 real fools, doing something back in the day. And these guys were much smarter than me. In 8 to 9 months, they realized that, we have day jobs that we should go back to, and this is just really not happening.
Day jobs that pay us.
That
yeah.
pay us and that, that are not so stressful.
No, so what did you create?
So they're just a cafe.
Okay.
It's just a cafe serving some sandwiches and some shit. Okay. And I don't even know with what intention or what guts we started this, because we didn't know chefs, we didn't know anybody. We just wanted to start it. Well, it was not my idea, first of all.
But what people were coming?
People were coming because this weird, hippie community of art tech people were anyway there, and they were like, "Oh, we'll eat here," and there was nobody else passing by that street to stop. So I don't know who even came. Actually, now when I think of it, I'm like, what were we thinking? But there were some colleges close by, so we had some kids coming in. It was very random. So yeah, these three smart guys just left and said, we're up and going, and if you want to keep it open, you keep it open. If you don't want to, you don't, or whatever.
Your problem.
Your
now.
problem. But somewhere there, I kind of felt that, hey, let's not close this yet, because something is here. I'm not able to grasp it, but there are seeds of something here. So let it stay open for a while and let me figure, And that kind of happened for a while. It stayed open for 4-5 years in its very nascent form, and it was really bad. But it gave us a lot of lessons.
And you were not doing the community events at
nothing
this
at all.
No,
I had my
cultural
architecture
curation. It was pure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had my architecture practice. I was doing
you did have that. So you were doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was working in urban design. I had my own architecture practice. This was just a side hustle that, we just wanted to see what would happen. But I was very, very curious because of the kind of people that came to the space, because of this, community that was there. And suddenly I started to see that, there is this need for this third kind of space, and the coffee shops, of course, were also there at that point, right? Coffee Day and all that was thriving. But this third kind of space where you felt like you had your community, where you felt that you could do other things than just eat and drink and work, where all of these things could actually collide and meet, and a fourth kind of thing, happens. All of that was happening in a very, very organic, spontaneous, very disorganized way. And it took me some time to kind of see it, recognize it, understand it. And that's when we ran that place for a while just as it was. And then after I had my first child is when I was like, hey, I think I need to put my thoughts together. I think there is a need for a space like this, but it needs to be formalized a little more. That's how Courtyard started.
So the cafe continued for a while, but then you started curating sort of.
So we changed
events.
The full space. Okay. So the cafe, as it were, we kind of just, stopped operations for a bit, and then we designed the space fully again. The house, of course, is as is, but then we built the newer part that we have now, and then we have the courtyard in between the old and the new. So when we built the new space is when we started looking at how do you program now, right? It's not just a cafe anymore. It's meant to do more. So that's when we started looking at new age museums, new age, public spaces where you look at the Tate Modern, you look at all these places, but then you also look at a PS1 in, Queens, somewhere where they would take these old, public schools, and then they would convert it, into public spaces that were doing something a little different from, in terms of programming than what the museums would do, right? So actually in the US, a lot of these museums would fund these smaller schools, public spaces, so that whatever programming could not happen there could actually happen in these smaller spaces, and it was meant for a different audience. It was meant for a different experience, right? So it was almost like an indie take on traditional arts, right? And that's what we wanted to do. So we looked at the space and we designed it in a way that it could be flexible, because I knew that we were just starting off with very basic ideas, and the space had to evolve as and when we evolved. I evolved. The audience evolved. Everything had to happen organically, and I didn't get a pulse on everything all at once. And that's why we designed the space in a way that it could be flexible and it could change, things could get added on, things could move around and all of that. So that was the first footprint. And that's why it's all built with steel, and metal sheets, so that it's not very permanent. and we'll make it, permanent as we go, depending on, like what the program is. So that's how it started.
And this was then what, 2018? 2018, okay.
Yeah, 2018. So we took a break in between, but 2018 is when, I think 2017 is when we started planning it, and it opened in the end of 2018.
And so how did you start kind of curating the programming? Like, how did you reach out to whether it was artists or musicians or,
One thing I realized is it's best to know quickly what you can do and can't do. I think a lot of people kind of make the mistake sometimes of thinking they can do everything. I've been very self-critical from a very young age to know what I can and cannot do. So what I realized when we were doing that is I can build the space. I can have the vision for the space. I know what I want there as an audience, but I'm not the curator, and I don't have the networks to be able to do it. So the first thing was to really go out there and just meet as many people who are in the arts, who are in the business of, curating, or who've been in it enough. Just go talk to them and sort of get their ideas, see who's available to work. We realized that this had to get built as a community bottom up. So even when we were designing the space, because of the architectural, background I had, I kind of, even during the design phase, I would call all my friends I knew in all kinds of, fields, and we would do jurings. We would sit there and we would show them, all the architectural plans and everything. I'm like, what do you think? What do you want in a space like this? So we would have everybody there, from artists to chefs to musicians to moms.
When you were designing
I was designing it, right?
Because so it was almost like a community project.
Yeah,
in the design
and that's where I think the education really came in handy, because that's how you actually build context, right? You need to take everybody's, opinion if it is meant for them, right? So that kind of jury mentality, I think, really helped, because I did 2-3 rounds of it, and you got everybody's ideas, then they get, invested in the project, right? And then they tell me that, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, you should talk to so-and-so. So that kind of happened really organically. Like, now when I think of it, there was no one method to the madness at all. It just sort of flowed from one to the other. But I think what helped is kind of having the intention straight up, very clear and honest with, everybody else that we wanted to work with. And they really helped me along the way. So I don't think Courtyard is a space that could have ever been built by one person. It's really built by everybody who's worked with us, friends, family, artists, everybody who's kind of come in and, helped us do it. So, and I still think it works like that even now.
It's a continuous work in progress.
It's like an amoeba that keeps changing, keeps getting, added with stuff, deleted with stuff. It's like that. So the programming, like you asked me, comes from that network of people that we built. One after another, I just got lucky with the people who sort of came in to the process and the life, of the space, and everybody left so much with us,
And when did the sort of F&B become a stronger part of the space?
COVID was really a turning point for us. Because we were shut for the longest time, because we were amongst the first to shut and the last, to allow to open, because you're like a public space. What worked to our advantage was that the property itself was kind of small enough for people to have private, events if they wanted to, and large enough to call a slightly larger group, if they wanted. So just after COVID, people wanted to meet and, wanted to gather, but they wanted to still do it in a controlled environment, right? That's where we kind of, I think, gained a little traction, because it was open, right? Nobody wanted to be in an AC closed space, so that helped. We were able to curate stuff for people. So during COVID, during the end of COVID and post-COVID is when we started doing a lot of private gigs for a lot of people, where we curated a lot of, events around food for them. And that's when we kind of already knew a few chefs, so we reached out to a lot more. They were also looking for a lot of, work to do. So it just worked in our favor that the two kind of came together. And I think we just did those private events really well. So we would bring in music, we would bring in theater, we'd bring in art for them and say that, hey, listen, don't just do a dinner, but do it with this and with that. So we started differentiating ourselves from the usual private event spaces, I guess. And that worked. Then we just started doing a few more pop-ups again. I think Naru Noodle Bar coming there was like the first sort of a pop-up we started with post-COVID, and of course that did phenomenally well. We had Gautam Krishnan Kuti, who's also a Bangalore OG chef, doing his pop-ups. And the good thing also was a lot of great chefs came out of commercial kitchens at that point of time, and everybody was willing to express themselves because you kind of had so much time to think about things, and then everybody was raring to go. And I guess we became that first access point, even for the chefs to kind of come and express themselves, because the barriers weren't high at all to come here and do anything. So again, it was the community of chefs that adopted us, rather than the other way around. So they started coming and asking us, like, can I do a pop-up here now? And I want to do this, I want to do that. And we were like pretty much open and game for anything. And it happened all so fast that within 1.5, 2 years, we were seen as an F&B spot and, almost like an incubator space for them.
So it's been like 3 years of that?
Yeah, I think June will be coming up on 3 years.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that I sort of started noticing more and more as well in the last few years. And I felt like a bit of a loner when we were doing this. And then suddenly I felt like, okay, we're not crazy. There's other crazies out there. But, I think one sort of commonality is the fact that both Magazine Street Kitchen and the Conservatory, or the Courtyard rather, are family-owned properties.
Right.
Do you feel like, I know for a fact that with us, that's partly what makes it commercially viable for us to do this kind of thing, right? Because it's not a restaurant at all. But is it fair to say that this kind of format worked because we didn't have the burden of rent and, that we had that flexibility to do things?
100%.
Yeah.
I think there's no two ways about it. We could take the risk to do it and say that it's okay if it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years for it to actually work, because you don't have that burden. I mean, while the constraint of rent was not there, we may have had many other constraints. Sure. But this is a huge one. It really takes the pressure off. But it also gives you the added, the added responsibility of doing something good with it and not something really silly. But yeah, I mean, places like Bombay especially, but even Bangalore now, rents play a huge. I mean, when people say like, why is it here? And I'm like, we can do this because it's here, and the fact that even if we were paying rent, you can't get a space this size in the middle of, sort of the high street. And so I think that is a factor. And I say this to people who want to replicate Magazine Street Kitchen or a space like the Conservatory in other places. I think that's you're absolutely right. It allows you to take that risk because you don't have that pressure of rent, and it allows you to really experiment. And of course, you have to do it well for it to work. Even for people to come here, it's something that has to be attractive enough. What's the sort of direction that you're seeing F&B go? I mean, you're in Bangalore. The last few times I've been to Bangalore, I mean, I've eaten my way through the city, and each time it's been completely different. The explosion of restaurants that's happening there. I mean, I'll always be a champion for the city anyway, but it's just very exciting because, like you said, it's going from 0 to 100 very fast. It's also a lot of things happening at the same time. Bombay, Delhi has probably historically also had a lot of money and has also had a lot of people wanting to spend that money. Yeah. Bangalore has never been like that, right? It's historically been a very quiet, simple, good South Indian, city where we don't spend so much on, going out. And of course, it's changing now. When the Bangalore I grew up in was a lot more conservative, not that opulent and exuberant like these cities are, right? Going out was there, but it was not, that much, right? Entrepreneurship in food was not that big. It was more like the dosa, place, all the heritage sort of spaces. And those were the kind of examples that we grew up with. What's happening now is a factor of many things, like real estate boom, the tech boom, audiences traveling a lot more. It's all kind of led to a perfect storm, I think, that has kind of helped brew the Bangalore scene a little more. Um, the number of startups, the number of sort of, tech industry, the people and the money that's flowed into the space because of that is unimaginable, right? There are a lot of young people, single families, right? Single people, nuclear families, much smaller families with a lot of disposable income because they don't live in larger families like places like here maybe, right? And that has given rise to this very curious audience with a lot of money, right? And they want to spend it. Now, they want to spend it in a way that makes them look cool. And what are those things? Food becomes one of the primary things. And of course, bars, because Bangalore has always been like a pub city, a music city. It's kind of had that DNA of the cool culture, the cooler, westernish, culture was always there.
Emulating the West, yeah.
Yeah. We were the rock capital, of India. We were the pub city of India, right? Because we had all of that happening much earlier. The F&B scene was not like the way it was, but these things were always there. Now, it's easy to plug in food into these two things. When you have an audience that's already curious about music and, drinking and all that, food becomes a natural, extension to it. And that's kind of buoyed by the money that's also kind of come in. One of the biggest constraints we have is the excise, right? Because of the because you're not able to get licenses that easily. Otherwise, I think we would have seen an explosion long back, right? That's a large constraint that all of us need to work with because you're constantly thinking, is it worth opening spaces without the alcohol? And that's always like a chicken and egg situation. You don't know until you open and stuff. But now we're seeing more and more places opening and doing okay even without the alcohol, right? Like you've got Kopitiam Lais that's opened as it doesn't have alcohol, but it's doing great. Navu is there, that's doing great. Gorilla Diner now is opening and it's doing great. Naru is there, but it's, it serves only wine and sake like we do. But all great examples to show that, hey, you don't need that. I think Bangalore is two-headed beast right now, On one side, you have these huge breweries and these huge places that are like, cities unto themselves, right? 1,000 seats, 2,000 seats, and it's full, right? It's full.
I can't even fathom that in Bombay happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it seems very sort of commonplace.
It's commonplace. I mean, it's also happened in a particular geography of the city. The other head of this beast is this very focused, hyper-focused sort of smaller dining spaces that are doing really well. From Navu to Naru to, Kla, Gorilla Diner. They're all young chefs who are expressing themselves very fearlessly. And they're able to do it because we probably don't have the constraints like maybe y'all have here in terms of rents being that high. They don't have to deal with the excise guys. All of that is happening. So there is one side that is like just cultivating an audience that's just eating and drinking rubbish, in terms of, and just in terms of the brewery culture. They're all so big. So there's no nuance of, what you're eating and what you're drinking, but it's cultivating that going out audience. Right. So
but it's almost like the first step, right? Like if you don't want to spend too much, you just want to have like a, casual beer and some bites with friends or whatever, till you kind of graduate to a slightly more aspirational, maybe, experience.
I think so. I think what those places are doing is good for us in a way because they're kind of like just bringing a lot more people out, and making them eat and drink. And even if 1% of that going out crowd wants to now be a bit more, discerning and, understanding of what they're going to do, then they have these, choices as well. So that's where it's so interesting for me, right? Like the city is filled with an educated, experienced, curious audience, which is, I think, more than any other city. And even if we're able to capture a small chunk of that audience and bring them in for a lot more experiential dining, then it's like just win-win for both. And that's why the city, I think, is so exciting right now because you have audiences for both sides.
No, it really is. I mean, when I've been coming to Bangalore and trying out, whether it's these bars or I'm just like, why? Even Wine in Progress, I mean, I've been there a few times and I love that space. I mean, I also have a sort of, I'm partial to wine, but what made you create Wine in Progress?
So, just going back to what you say, I think, again, it's very specific to Bangalore that we're a very idea-rich city. When you are a tech hub and you've got that kind of, like the amount of startups we have, the amount of everybody you meet in Bangalore, you throw a stone and they want to start a business in something, right? Everybody is filled with ideas. It's very entrepreneurial, and the entrepreneurship is not in the old school, but in the new school way of doing, any work. I think that's very ingrained in us, that we are a new city, and we're a new city with new ideas. It's very different from a Bombay or a Delhi. So the audience also is tuned to accepting new ideas. Like even if you were to look at any tech space, right, Swiggy, this, that, what, they all start off in Bangalore. It's always like the testing ground is Bangalore, because the audience will catch on very quickly. It's an audience that you can convert very quickly.
There's almost like a larger audience that is adventurous there compared to here. I think that's what it is, right? Which seems counterintuitive because it's a much larger population in Bombay.
I think Bombay and Delhi are a lot, like the audience is not that open.
Delhi, I agree with you. I think they're even less adventurous than Bombay. Yeah. But,
Bombay is adventurous, but Bangalore way more.
Yeah.
Way more because of just the age bracket of the audience that can spend as well, So Wine in Progress happened because I was just tired of telling everybody, sorry, we don't have, spirits, or, sorry, we don't have a full alcohol license. I'm like, let's stop kind of, saying that and spin this around and say that we're going to champion the spirits we have. Why do we need to be sorry about it? And wine is a very, very big growing market. Right. And that's when Arijit Bose came into the picture, and I had a chat with him, and he was really one of the reasons why I had the confidence to do it.
And it's amazing because Bose is actually very much like in the spirit world, right? With cocktails, and that's what he's known for. And here you've created a space together.
But also because he was so excited by the idea, like we ran Wine in Progress as a weekday wine bar at the conservatory for 6 months.
Oh, I didn't know that.
As a test pilot sort of thing. So we had Karan Upamanyu doing the food, and we had Tarini doing the wines. We ran it as a weekday wine bar, happening only Wednesdays and Thursdays, because those are the days we were not having the pop-ups. And we're like, hey, wait a minute, this seems to be catching on. It seems to be interesting that people are coming for wine and, small plates. And that's when I started talking to Bose, and I was like, hey, what do you think? I didn't know him at all actually earlier than that. We just had one or two chats, and I mean, the exuberance and the interest that he showed in it was really reaffirming that, okay, maybe, if he's saying it, then sure, maybe, sort of thing. So that's when he came on board, and then he really laid the footprint for how, like, the wine bar needs to work. I told him that this is the only space we have. Even if you want to make it larger, it's not going to happen.
It's a shoebox of a space, but it's fantastic. Yeah. It's really fantastic. And I think it works, like I said, because it's a shoebox, and it has that coziness and intimacy and that sort of,
I think the constraint worked in our favor, and he really kind of championed it more than I did, in a way, saying I kept telling him I don't think it's going to work, I'm not sure, I don't know about this, and he's like, no, believe me, we have to do it for the wine community, this is what it needs. So he was a lot more confident than I was, but having somebody like that on your side is just takes half your stress out of it. But I think that's what it was. We really wanted to just take the constraint of not having a full alcohol license, but having only a wine license, but really making it work in our favor.
But are there people coming who wouldn't, you think, not really wine drinkers, and who are like, this is a cool space and I'm going to start drinking wine? Do you think it's people who were drinking wine that were like, oh my God, finally, like I would have been, like, that finally there's a space for us? What's the audience that's coming?
It's a mix of both, as we expected. A lot of the wine drinkers in Bangalore have a great personal collection of their own, right? They probably have some great wines that we will never have, sure. Right? They are like great, maybe expensive from all over the world or whatever. We have to work with the constraints of the wines that we can, access. But having said that, both kinds of, people have come to the wine bar because of the explorative nature of the Bangalore audience, a lot of them who are not into wine have also showed up and like, hey, I don't know anything about, about wine, tell me. And that's where the genius of Bose, I think, has worked, because he was very sure that he didn't want sommeliers, at the bar, but he wanted, young wine enthusiasts, to be at the bar, so they don't intimidate you.
And it's true, like I've experienced that, and they're very sort of excited about kind of getting you to try something. And I mean, I don't know how educated or serious they are, but it doesn't matter. It's like a joint discovery in a way,
right?
That's
Exactly.
happening. Yeah,
that was really meant to be the thing, that let's learn with you. Though all of them are pretty good with their knowledge of wines and all that, but they will not intimidate you with it. If we do get people who know their wines and they want to have a larger conversation, then these guys are game for that as well, right? They're not, they're not at a very high level sommelier game, but they're good and they're more than enough to make you drink a lot of wine.
So mission accomplished.
Yeah, so mission accomplished. So that energy has been great for us, that we've kind of got both people.
I wonder if it's like something that needs to be tried to, like you're saying, right? That sometimes you just have to try it to know whether it's going to work.
I think Bombay needs a wine in progress kind of space. You should do it.
Yeah. I keep getting bashed down.
No,
I'm
you
just
should.
like, okay. But yeah, I mean, it's the license, the excise, the rents, all of that. And that's just
But it's a format that's easy to kind of try.
Absolutely.
Right? It's just 14 seats. It's not, it's not capital intensive as much, as any other place. It's actually been one of our least capital intensive spaces,
But
because of
I
how
think
it
coming
is.
back to the courtyard, it's also that, right? It's
Yeah.
part of a space
Yeah.
that you're just like, let's just head there. And, whether you want to have the coffee or you want to have a glass of wine, whatever, it's just a space that you go and you're bound to meet other people. It's not the same thing as like just, plucking that out of there and
Yeah, I
putting
don't
it-
know how
yeah.
any one of these would work in isolation. I think it kind of like the ecosystem really helps, each and every project there.
Coming back to the conservatory and, focusing on the food part of it, you've obviously been doing a lot, discovering a lot of chefs. How do you go about that process? And, now you've moved to having residencies, so I guess slightly longer format, chefs being there for a little longer. So how has that evolved that from, when you started a few years ago?
When we started, we had to reach out to everybody, we had like a wish list, and, you kind of really kept looking at that list, wondering like, when would we get everybody you want? So that really started off like that, where we would reach out to people. But because of the pop-ups that we used to do, and because of the connections and the networks we already made, it was not that hard. We already had like one foot through the door. Now, and as we kind of moved along, it started becoming both ways, where people would reach out to us as much as we would reach out to, others. That's heartening. That's, nice to see and very interesting, because then you get to discover people that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have known. So it's a bit of both right now, that where we would still, we still have a wish list, and we still want, to kind of work with people. And there are a lot of people who reach out to us. We just have to become a lot more cognizant of what's the level at which you want to operate. You have to you cannot take your eye off the ball there at all, because for Bangalore, I know that we've built up a certain amount of trust that people have in the conservatory, that a lot of people show up for the meal without knowing who the chef is or the brand
Because
is.
they trust you to have
Because they
curated
trust
it.
the curation. It seems very non-transactional for them, that when we do our curation, it's not just to make money, but we really have the audience's interests, in mind. So I think that has translated into trust, and we can't break that. So hence we have to be a lot more careful now about how we curate.
We went through that a little bit in the beginning, where I kept thinking of this as a venue, right? Like I'm like you have BIC or NCP or whatever. I'm like, they're a venue. Someone comes and does a show. And if you don't enjoy it, that's between you and the artist. It's not the fault of the venue. And I kind of thought about that, thought about this space like that. But I realized very quickly that that's not how the audience sees it. And it's exactly what you're saying, which is that they expect a certain level of curation because you either in our case have restaurants or, you've been doing a certain level of experience and now you have to maintain that standard. So it's a big challenge though when you want to create a platform for chefs, especially those who don't have restaurants, to come and, do their sort of thing, but you may not have had the chance to try their food. I find that a big challenge. How do you kind of
Well, now we
deal with
insist,
that?
we insist that we have to taste the food.
But what if they're from another city?
Somebody either has to go or they have to come. Now we can't take first chances because there's too much at stake. Because the conservatory audience is the conservatory audience. They're not just the audience of that chef or of that food or whatever. We want to make them
Especially
our
if they're
audience.
not from the city, then it is your audience.
It is completely our audience. Yeah. So we can't take that chance. So we rely on either references. So if there was to be somebody from here, I'd probably call you and ask you, right? Like, are you sure? How are they? Whatever. I would take your feedback very seriously. I would do that with a lot of our other chef friends as well, because if they have seen their work, they have tasted their food, I will ask them a lot of questions. And everybody has really been very honest with me, which actually also makes me feel great because they also have the interest of the space, in mind. So it goes back to that community building both ways, right? Both the audience also, is helping you build, but the chef community is also really, helping us. So that becomes a huge sounding board for us, like the community at large itself. So I'll take their word very seriously.
The worst bit for me is, so we do something similar, and then the worst bit is like not taking it forward. I always struggle.
I know
to,
that is very
pass
hard.
on that feedback, but
that is very hard, and I find it very hard to do it, especially because I'm not somebody who's an expert on food. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like imposter syndrome sometimes when I have to tell them that, no, this is not working. And I'm probably thinking in my head, she's probably thinking, who the fuck are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's a little bit of a challenge, but I guess one has to do what one has to do. I may not understand food as well, but I understand my space bloody well. I know what's going to work there and what's not going to work there. That I do not doubt. I do not doubt the capability of my team in understanding what's going to work and not going to work. So it's taken us some time to get that confidence as well. But for everything else, in terms of like the technicality of the food and all of that, we have friends that we can, or we've got support that we can, rely on. But yeah, you're right. It's very hard to say no, and it's very hard to play judge, on many things. But it's become part of the job.
You've now got, the pop-up space. You've got Wine in Progress. You've got other spaces around that are being operated independently. Do you ever think you might want to open a restaurant, a full-on restaurant?
Life says never say never, but I think I want to say never. I see you guys working.
Not even tempted a little bit.
Absolutely not. I mean, I see you guys working so hard, and the amount of work that goes into keeping an everyday restaurant going, the challenges, and I see it from the outside so much, right? Like with so many people we know, I'm kind of seeing it. I don't think I have it in me to kind of do it. I was just telling Prerna that time that I'm very busy, very unambitious and all of that stuff. So it's kind of...
Doesn't look like that from the output of the courtyard, but...
No, I really am. But I don't think the restaurant business is for me. I'm in the business of culture. I'd like to stay there. We're still in the business of throwing out ideas and seeing, if it sticks. That's the interesting part for me. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do. Hopefully we'll have something opening soon in the first floor that we have. We're going to do a music sort of venue there. It's an ode to the Bangalore that I grew up in. Like I was saying, it's, the only two going out ingredients for us was music and beer. And this, space that we're going to build is going to be an ode to that, to the music and beer rooms that we had. So those are the things that excite me. So even there, I'm not running the food part. We got some, we have Aditya, Chef Aditya, who will be doing the food for us. So running the kitchen never excites me because I think it's too daunting for me, and especially because I don't understand it. Like I don't know the nuts and bolts of it, so I feel like everybody is just going to fool me in that. I understand the nuts and bolts of creating a space. I understand the nuts and bolts of running a venue for like for culture. So I think I'm going to stick to that. But that's also because that's the most exciting part for me.
So, what are the challenges that you face running the space today?
The first and foremost challenge is that every day I need to focus on the good stuff. Like I feel that because you're like just firefighting so much, that you tend to sort of not spend enough of your mind space on actually the fun things, like wanting to create IPs that are fun, wanting to do cool events, wanting to work with fun people. That kind of takes a backseat because of like the firefighting that I have to do. And that's the thing that irritates me the most. But I also realize that in a space like ours, which is small and needs my involvement a lot, I still have to do the firefighting myself, a lot of it. So the other challenge really ends up being that, it's never a space I think I can ever go hands off on. I can't install a team there and say that, okay, now I'm chilling. I don't think that can happen. We have a great team and they do handle a lot of it, but I'm still very much with it. So that is a challenge that, so my husband and me chat about this a lot because he's able to build a business that's automated in a way that he doesn't have to be there all the time. I mean, though he doesn't have to be there all the time, but I am there all the time. So he's like, you're just a manager. You're not, you act like a manager of the space. You're not acting like, you own the space, but that's the nature of the space because it needs so much from me.
Are you a control freak?
Probably am, I'm trying to learn not to be. I mean, having 2 kids has given me a lot of learnings in not trying to be a control freak. But I think I am. I think I'm very particular about a few things. The other challenges of running a venue are just the everyday mundane stuff. Like you have to deal with authorities, you have to deal with your licenses, you have to deal with breakdowns and just the everyday stuff.
The
operations and like the facilities. And because I'm the architect still in my mind, I'm still the one giving solutions for every, small thing that happens. So that's a huge challenge. But to me, all of that really comes back to that first point of because you're just, having to, firefight everything, it tends to take away the joy from the actual stuff. And that's what I think I struggle with the most.
I think that's every entrepreneur's problem, that, the ideas and the creative part that sort of got you going in the first place takes more and more of a backseat because of the execution part of it, which obviously wasn't there when you first ideated, right? And that's the fun bit.
True.
Yeah.
But I think the good part is that because we're inherently a creative space, I still get to do it. And, with the team that we've got, right, we have Viksha and Aditi and all these kids who are so bright and so motivated and so good that they give me the chance to still be the creative kid in the house.
Is it a challenge building the team that you need for a space like
I was just about to get to that. That's another challenge because it's not a run-of-the-mill JD that we, have to put out and you'll find people for. You need a specific personality. You need a specific skill set. They need to fit into the culture that we are trying to build. So that becomes a challenge. I generally interview a person 3, 4, 5 times because I'm always unsure whether they would be a good culture fit for the space. So building a team for a space like ours can be a little challenging because it's not conventional roles at all. But that also is interesting because it brings you, like people come to us from all sorts of fields saying that.
I was just going to ask, so is it generally doesn't need an F&B background, so to speak, right? Or in I don't know, curation or I don't even know. That's the thing.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't actually. Yeah. I mean, it helps to have an F&B background for some of the team members, but not all of them need it. That's when actually it gets interesting because there's this new favorite, phrase of mine. It's, I call it the surface area of serendipity, right? So when you kind of get people from various fields and you are looking at things from various angles, you increase the surface area of serendipity that can happen to you. And that's when it gets very interesting for us because, the dots become more and more. And when the dots become more and more, you join all the dots and the picture is, sharper. So when you sort of get people from various backgrounds coming in and contributing and you're working with collaborators from various backgrounds, it just creates a sharper picture. It creates a more colorful, interesting picture. And I don't want to lose that magic because I think that's what's sets the courtyard apart from a lot of other, venues in the city. Like if you were to ask me what is our product, actually, it's very ephemeral. The space is just there and it's just one part of it. But what we're creating is just things you just cannot put a finger on. Like you're creating a community, you're creating a culture, you're creating the hunger in the audience to want something very different. I think that's what we are trying to do. So when I look at other spaces, I'm looking at those things and not specifically the product of, programming. So there's a place called Shed in New York that does like really cutting edge, cultural stuff. It's very indie. I remember I used to go very often to this theater in New York called Angelica Theater. And that used to play very offbeat movies, very indie movies that nobody would really want to watch, really, except all the, hippies of New York would be there watching. But also like the serious, moviegoers would go. But every time I went there and sat there, right, it's just a sense of being enriched when you leave the space is what was so exciting for me, that, hey, I learned, this idea that, came across in that movie was like, just blew my mind. The movie may have been shit, but, something that you like just took away. And then you walk out of the theater and then they used to have a lovely cafe and some wine there that you could sit and talk to anybody. It's those kind of moments that you see in those kind of spaces that makes it very magical for me. There's a place called Jam Factory in Thailand, that's also very interesting, that does a lot of these kind of things. The National Gallery of Modern Art in London is a very brutalist building that everybody sort of hated, initially. I think now it's becoming a lot more interesting architecturally. Everybody can either love it or you can hate it. But what happens inside is, again, very interesting theater. And they also do a lot of, indie offbeat theater there as well. Right outside it is a skate park that is frequented by people who probably don't go to that theater at all. But the juxtaposition of the two,
and it's drawing in all kinds,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
It's just so interesting for me. And for me, that's the power of spaces. Like, what a space can do, the way it's created, where it's situated, and how you give context to that space. It's just magical for me, and so that's why all these spaces become so interesting.
I feel like after listening to you, I actually don't think of you as an F&B person. I think you're still very much about how a space is contributing to the city, right? I mean, the fact that there's food there or almost seems incidental. Yes, you're involved in F&B in very like significant ways, but I think that the heart of it, it's, what you're bringing to the city as a space.
At the heart of it, I want to still be the mayor of Bangalore.
Akhila for mayor.
The city is my first love, and that's, I think that way. And my dad always tells me, like, why did you do urban design architecture? You're like serving food now. What the hell is happening?
Tell him to listen to this podcast.
I know, I should. But and everything that I'm doing is a product of, my urban design education and my love for, public spaces. So I'm glad you got that.
I think it's very apparent. So we're going to ask you like a few of these scary rapid fire questions, which I know nobody loves, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm sadistic that way.
I'm not smart enough for this rapid fire.
No, it's all stuff you've probably been asked before. So whose pop-up has been the most fun to host?
Knew it.
Yeah, I know. I have to. It gets worse. That's easy.
What's been the most fun?
Yeah.
I mean,
you've done so many.
I know,
so I'm sure
and they're all like such good friends now.
Yeah.
But Gresham Fernandez.
Yeah.
I think that his first pop-up, I think, was very revelatory for us.
In what way?
I've never seen a service that synchronized. It felt like an opera playing out in front of me. Like Manoj Chef and him are like a match made in heaven, I've never seen that kind of coordination, that kind of precision, that kind of care for every guest that's there, making sure that they're well fed, they're happy. I mean, they were looking at every aspect of the meal, a 360-degree view of a meal experience. I think that comes from this sheer experience that they have. And starting off at a time when there was no Instagram and, where everything is not out there, in the public domain, they've built it from a time that was gritty, that was real F&B, I feel, and that kind of really shown through for me, that you just put your head down and work. Everything, like the cameras can be there and, like everybody can be saying something to you, but nothing comes in the way of proper work. I think that's what we saw when they worked, that the rigor, the attention to detail, and just the honesty with which they worked. I've not seen it in anybody else, honestly. And to me, that was fun also, because it just kind of had goosebumps, seeing it all the time. And they don't take themselves so seriously. I mean, that it is serious, but there's an easy way in which they do it, that there's jokes flying around, there's all of that happening, and they're also willing to fail because they're doing new stuff. All of that, I think, to me, it was like going to like a crash course in college on how to run a pop-up, It was amazing. I think
but, I'm digressing from the rapid fire, but that thing of failure, like, because you have an open kitchen, do you not see these disasters kind of happen? Like, how do you deal with that?
All the time. I mean, the first service is always the most mental service, right? Because we are getting used to the chefs, they are getting used to us, they're getting used to the space. We don't have like a lovely kitchen like you guys do.
Please, trust me, disasters happen here as well.
Yeah, very basic kitchen that we need to really upgrade now. But the first service is bloody mess, There are very few people who've been able to nail the first service. But I think the caliber of the chef like really shows when they've turned it around in the immediate next service. They have grasped it, they have understood it, they've taken our feedback, and within either a few hours or the next day, they have turned it around as if it's their own kitchen. I mean, it's wonderful to watch, and I look at that as a caliber, like a marking, because the good ones just never let you fail in the next one. They're amazing. So that way,
the ability to like be flexible and pivot and be open to feedback and things for sure is.
But in the conservatory, I think the failing also becomes a performance. Like because it's so open.
Do you think like the audience actually like thrives in seeing people
they
have
love it.
disasters? Yeah.
They love it. I have seen people say, "What do you think?" He's screaming at me. And we've had a couple of those situations happening as well. So I think it's drama. Finally, it's so performative. Like food has become performative.
I always say it's dinner and a show when people come here. So
100%. It's performative now. Everybody understands it. Even the chefs have become very savvy to the fact that it is, it's very performative. The audience is in it. They have paid for that show, basically. So yeah, I think the disasters have happened, but it's really all been a part of it, and that's what makes it fun, actually.
Who's on your wish list that hasn't been to the conservatory yet? I know one because I've heard you speak.
Yeah, I think Manu Chandra is still going to be my
elusive.
Yeah, I mean, he's just Bangalore royalty for me. He's also helped us a lot, mentored us a lot,
If it makes you feel any better, I've tried getting him here and it hasn't happened either.
I'm glad. Let's do this together. So, I mean, he has cooked and done some, private events there, but I'm also like a little schoolgirl in front of him, I'm always like, yes, chef. I don't know why, but...
we'll send him this clip.
Yeah. I've still not had the guts to formally like ask him, will you do a pop-up here? It's always been like, chef, please come or something, So
slide into his DM.
Yeah. I mean, even that I don't have the guts to do. But yeah, I'd really love to see him doing something at the conservatory, only because it's just truly special for me because of what he stands for in Bangalore and how he's an institution in Bangalore. I think a lot of what's happening in Bangalore today can get traced back to him. And he's such a champion of, good food and just, he's amazing to talk to. When he writes so well. I mean, it's just the full package, and I think that it's so nice that, Bangalore has him, right? So I feel like, yeah, if I could get him to do a pop-up at the conservatory, it would be great.
If you could drink one wine for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
Yeah, I'm so bad with names, yeah. But if I would,
Or anything that you've had recently that you've enjoyed?
I really don't know the names, but there was a Riesling that I really like. But I can have sparkling wine all my life. I can sit with
Make champagne.
I can
and
sit
it's
with
even
strawberries.
better.
I can have it every day. Yeah, but
You
I
should
don't
have
know.
told us we would put
I
some
should go
bubbly
fancy.
in here instead of the chai.
Next time.
Yeah. What's your cheat meal from Swiggy when you're in Bangalore?
It has to either be a biryani or a burger. Like Bangalore, you'll have to have the Nagarjuna biryani.
Yeah.
I think that's just something that we all do as a cheap meal. Yeah, but I'd love to have a burger. There's a space called Beyond Burgers, and I like the burgers there, so I'd love to have.
I have to ask you, by the way, so do you get dibs on reservations at Naru? How many messages do you get for a reservation there?
Yeah, so this is something that I need to get a Nobel
Put out
Prize
there.
for, because the number of messages I get for Naru, because everybody thinks I partly own it, I think, and I have to keep, so now I have like a standard message that goes out that I completely understand, and I'm so sorry, and I have nothing to do with the space. It's only a leased space, and I think I've lost many friends over it, but I don't.
They're like,
tell
you're
com-
useless.
yeah, absolutely. I've heard that a lot. But now it's become less because I've said no steadfastly to so many people that Kavan needs to really give me a prize for this.
So you don't have a secret slot
don't
that
have.
you
I don't have
auction
this.
out at.
No, that just speaks very highly of my professionalism, not his.
Okay, what are the 5 places you would take a guest chef to in Bangalore?
I'll go all Bangalore and local on this, right? So I love CTR. It's my favorite dosa. I also love the Goli Bache there. So I would take them there. Because I grew up around there, so we went there very often. So CTR for sure. Brahmins, because I love the idli there and I just love the space and just how cutely Bangalore it is. There's another place called the Bengaluru Cafe, which I absolutely love, and I take everybody there because the dosas are just banging.
But there are multiple of those.
No, Bengaluru Cafe is
there's only one.
There's
Okay,
only one
fine.
of those. So you have to go to that one
Huh.
and not the others, because if you're going to the others, then it's wrong.
So where's the one that you're...
It's close to Madhavan Park in Jayanagar. So that's the one. So there's no seating and all that there. You just have to stand and eat. I think now amongst the newer spaces, I think, like just Naru is a space that if you can get a spot in that you should go to. What are they? Like Nagarjuna is also one of those places that has just become iconic with Bangalore, right? Like you can't not have a meal there. I think Bangalore Uta Company is doing a great job in championing, the food that we have from the region. I think Navo is doing some excellent work as well in terms of just clean new ways of eating. I love Lupa because I love Manu Chandra. What else? Yeah, I think I think I gave you more than 5. Yeah.
I've got a few bonus.
Yeah.
Lovely. So I can't wait to come back. I don't think I've been to a couple of the ones that you mentioned. So
I
I'll have
love
to come
Ebony
back.
as well. You should go there. I love So Ebony is an old space that I would go with my dad when we were kids, and it's very old Bangalore again. But I love it because they have Asian food in one area, and then they've got Indian food and they've got everything. But
The quintessential multi-cuisine that we all actually secretly love.
I love the butter chicken there. It's my standard of the best butter chicken. The dal makhani there is amazing. The Asian food is just to die for. Best views of Bangalore because it's right up 13th, 14th floor and it's on MG Road, so you get a good view of the city. So it's very nostalgic, and they've done such a good job of just keeping it so good for so many years. So it's one of my favorites actually to go to. Yeah.
Well, I've got my list sorted now for my next trip. But listen, thank you. This was lots of fun and really informative. And yes, like I said, I think you're the keeper of cool culture in Bangalore more than F&B. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank
It's
you. Thank you. It
amazing.
was a pleasure to be here because it's one of the space that I was inspired by to actually do, whatever we're doing. So thank you
Yeah.
for being an inspiration.
Lovely.